Welcome to the Founder Hour podcast. I'm your co-host, Pat, and on today's episode, we sit down with Blake Mycoskie. He's the founder of TOMS Shoes and more recently Madefor, as well as a few other successful ventures which we dive into. We talk about everything from his upbringing and being a top tennis player in the country, well on his way to going pro, how an Achilles injury in college completely changed the trajectory of his life, the valuable lessons he's learned from his successes and failures, the trip to Argentina that sparked the idea for TOMS, why he walked away from the business after 8 years when the company was doing about $500 million in sales, the toxic side of the public acclaim he had received throughout his career, and why he ultimately started Madefor, his current business. If you're interested in giving Madefor a try, we have a unique discount for our listeners. Go to getmadefor.com and use the code FOUNDERHOUR for 20% off. There's so much incredible insight and knowledge packed into this episode, coupled with Blake's extremely unique entrepreneurial story. So we hope you enjoy. Here we go.
Yeah, a lot of people ask me if I got my kind of entrepreneurial tendencies as a child, and to some degree, yes. I mean, I had, the lemonade stand, the cookie, business, those typical things. But I actually think it really was more directly correlated to how much I was focused on being a great tennis player growing up. I started playing tennis when I was like 8 years old and became one of the top players in the state and then later in the country. And I ended up moving away from home, living at a tennis academy, pretty much dedicating all of my, kind of youth to playing tennis. And tennis as an individual sport, I think, is a great preparation for being an entrepreneur because you're not, relying on anyone but yourself. And it's incredibly, competitive. And so, really from age 8 to say 20, my whole life was basically training and playing tennis tournaments.
And was the goal to become a professional tennis player and basically, travel around the world playing? I mean, and what happened? If that was the goal, what did happen? And because you clearly didn't end up doing that.
Yeah, and it actually leads to my entrepreneurial life. So yes, that was the goal. I went to college on tennis scholarship, and my sophomore year, I had a bad injury to my Achilles tendon, and I was basically in a full leg cast for several months. And about 3 weeks into that experience, one of the problems with being in a full leg cast and living in a dormitory is I couldn't carry my laundry down to the laundry facility at the bottom of the dorm. Now, that might not sound like a big deal now because there's a lot of companies that will come and pick up and deliver your laundry. But back then, there wasn't. And I had this very distinct memory of actually looking in the yellow pages, because this is pre-Google, and looking for someone to come pick up and do my laundry because it was literally piling up in my dorm room, and nothing like that existed. And that was a few days before Thanksgiving. And on Thanksgiving, I was with my roommate at the time at their house, and his dad was very entrepreneurial. And as I was explaining the problem with my laundry, he said to us, "You guys should start a laundry business." And I grew up with a dad that was a doctor, and my grandfather was a doctor, and really a long lineage of healthcare professionals. My dad's very entrepreneurial, but at that stage, I really hadn't been around business people. And so this idea of starting a business was very exotic and fun, and it also was going to serve, one of the needs that I had, like most entrepreneurial ventures typically do. And so, yeah, my roommate and I started this thing called Easy Laundry, where we picked up and delivered people's laundry. And that was my first entrepreneurial venture and also the end of my tennis career.
Was it devastating for you that after, 12 plus or 15 plus years of playing tennis, that suddenly it had come to an end and there was really nothing else that you had set your mind to? Or was it more so, this is what life dealt me, I'm just going to kind of move on and, figure something out? I mean, what was your mentality like? Because I know a lot of people that, whether they're transitioning careers or whether they're trying to go from, a job to being an entrepreneur, or from going from high school to college, they're confused, right? They don't really know what's ahead. Yeah. So they get depressed, they get sad, they get anxious. What was your mental state like, and how did you deal with all that?
The thing is that it happened so quickly that I really didn't have a lot of time to sit back and do deep thinking about it. But what I did find very quickly is a lot of the things I loved about being a competitive athlete um, translate into being an entrepreneur. Like, I had to be, really focused on the business. I was competitive because after about 6 months into starting the business, there was another company that was trying to get laundry customers on our campus as well. So a lot of what I spent my whole life doing with tennis translated pretty quickly to being an entrepreneur. So I didn't find that I had like a period of time to even stop and reflect. It was just I went from one thing to the next, which I think you hear about a lot with
Yeah.
entrepreneurs.
Right. Totally. So you launch Easy Laundry, and you've never been an entrepreneur before. You're 20 years old, still in college at SMU. What is that like? I mean, was it an automatic hit where people like, this is what we've been waiting for, or was it an uphill battle?
It was a total uphill battle, and for a very funny reason, actually. Most of our customers were people in the fraternities and sororities on campus. And we very quickly realized that most of the girls didn't want to sign up because they didn't want me to see their panties, which was really funny because I wasn't doing the laundry myself. I was just doing the pickup and delivery. So I literally had to take out an ad in the school newspaper with some funny, picture and saying about, I don't look at your panties or something. It was really ridiculous. But that was one of the issues. And the other issue is just that
And
like
you're like
it was such a new.
and you're like at a Methodist university.
Exactly. So yeah, no, I mean it was a little bit of an uphill battle that first semester. I'll tell you what our big break was, and this is interesting because I think this is a great lesson for all business people, is like really knowing your customer, right? So I assumed that our customer was the students because they're the ones who no longer have to do their laundry when they sign up. But I was wrong. The students were less interested. It was actually the parents of incoming freshmen that were our main customer. Because when we were set up at the beginning of like where they bought their books and got all their stuff registered, once we started setting up there and got permission from the school to do so, that's when our business took off, because parents, especially of this kind of, wealthy private school, were like so concerned that their kids were going to ruin all their nice clothes by not doing their laundry very well if they'd never really done it before. And so the parents were the ones who were our best customers in signing their kids up.
I'm curious, when you first started it, and I'm not sure if you mentioned like what your major was when you were in college, but were you like, did you have an idea of how to even run a business, or was it something that you just kind of just dove into it and you learned kind of by doing?
Yeah, totally learning by doing. I mean, my major really when I went to college was to become a professional tennis player. And then I guess my minor was philosophy. So I had no interest in business. Like I wasn't going anywhere near the business school. And so,
Yeah.
it was more of just like, learning by doing. And the funny thing is, I didn't even know what the word entrepreneur was until 3 or 4 months into launching the laundry business. Someone said to me, "Oh, wow, like, you're a young entrepreneur," or "that's very entrepreneurial." And I had to literally look up the definition of the word.
Mm, that's funny. I know you ultimately ended up selling Easy Laundry because you had done what, 1 million in sales. Was it a good exit for you? I mean, or was it something that you kind of regret now?
Oh no, it was a good exit, and it was fun to make a little bit of money at such a young age. I mean, I was 20 years old at the time, and it kind of helped me, kind of have some confidence to go do other entrepreneurial ventures. So it's still, but the cool thing is, I started that business 25 years ago. Actually, it's 25th year, and it's still operating today.
Oh wow,
Mm.
has it expanded? I mean, or is it just kind of still the same?
Yeah, it's changed hands to a couple bigger companies, and now and these companies not only do laundry, but they get into like cleaning of uniforms and stuff in Dallas, and now
Right.
it's I think about 5 different universities, and it's part of a bigger organization now. But still, whenever I go to Dallas, I see those trucks operating.
Why do you think that is? I'm curious. Like, obviously, we see a lot of businesses come and go, and this space, we've seen a lot of innovation over the last 25 years too. Do you think it was like the idea and like the execution of it and what you were focused on, like the sort of niche segment of students at the time that made it such a standing sustainable business, or was it just kind of over time the right people got a hold of it and were able to continue it?
No, I think and this is what I would say has been kind of one of the things that I've been lucky at, in a lot of my businesses is that they've kind of connected into a cultural experience. And so I think what happened was after the first, 4 or 5 years of me running the business, it got very ingrained that when you go to SMU, you sign up, you get your books, you sign up for this, and you sign up for the laundry service. It just became like a thing. Like it's not even it didn't really become a question. And so just culturally, SMU's a campus or Vanderbilt's a campus or, whatever these University of Texas has these services. And, and I think it just is like, they'd ask the older classmen, oh yeah, I use it. It's great. And so I think, yeah, we had to provide a good service, but I think it's less about, kind of killer execution and more about just that it became part of the culture of being a freshman in college.
Blake, knowing a little bit about your background and story, because, we've listened to podcasts and read about you, unlike other founders, you've had so many different periods in your entrepreneurial journey. It's been one venture after another, and you're only, in your early 40s, and I'm sure that's still continuing. So, kind of going to the point of after college, your after college entrepreneurial period, what was that like? What did you do? You had sold a business. Did you launch something new?
Yeah, I'd say that the two things that really characterize myself entrepreneurially that I think is different based on biographies and podcasts and other things I've read about other entrepreneurs and founders is it's actually funny. It's almost like someone who is always has to have a girlfriend or a boyfriend. As soon as they break up with one, they go into the next one. That's how my business life has been. Yeah. There hasn't been long periods of being a bachelor. Almost every business idea that I had while I was operating the other business or closing it down if it wasn't working or selling it if it was. So it really hasn't been these long periods of except actually with Madefor. So I know we're going to get into Madefor lately, but Madefor was much more part of a personal journey that I was on when I had some, kind of inner struggles and got diagnosed with mild depression and some other stuff that happened to me. But that led to a period of calmness and kind of inner work and kind of, really kind of taking a pause, which then led to Madefor. So Madefor is really the only business that didn't come out of another business. But yeah, I went from the laundry business to the outdoor advertising business, to launching a cable television channel, that failing, but through the failing of that, launching an online driver's ed company. And then ultimately from driver's ed company, went on a trip to Argentina that led to TOMS. And then TOMS obviously was my longest business. Really, I ran it for over a decade before I kind of got burnt out and started looking at doing other things. And in that 2-year period of kind of the burnout and soul searching is when I started practicing what ultimately became the Madefor program. So that's kind of how my, entrepreneurial life has flowed. And I know that's quite different than others especially because all those businesses have really nothing to do with each other.
I'm curious with you, oftentimes, an entrepreneur, there's a few different ways of identifying an idea or a problem or something to start a business around, right? Like one is you see sort of a gap in the marketplace. There's a, customer segment that's underserved and you can, create a solution for them. The other is a pain point, right? Solving a solution for a problem. And another is just sort of what inspires you and just kind of there isn't really a business segment or something that you could create a business around, but it's just something that you have a passion for and you want to just start. For you, how did you go about it? It sounds like all your different businesses were in different verticals, almost completely different industries. So how did you go about finding these ideas and pursuing them?
Well, I think the only consistent thing about all the businesses is that I had absolutely zero experience in any of the industries when I started. So I had no experience in laundry, no experience in outdoor advertising, no experience in a television channel, no experience in shoes, no experience in online education, and definitely no experience on creating a wellness company to help people live their best lives. So the way that I went about it really was personal experiences that I had that I either got inspired by or that I had a personal pain point myself. I got inspired by the fact that, that there were these children in Argentina that didn't have shoes and I felt like I could help them. And I had discovered a shoe there that I really loved myself. So that was kind of a combination of a personal experience that I wanted to bring the shoe to America, and I wanted to help these kids. With the driver's ed company, for instance, that was a conversation I had with a 15-year-old boy who was a son of a woman that worked for me at the cable channel that was in the process of closing down. And he was talking about his driver's ed experience as if it was like worse than going to detention. And I thought, gosh, that's not good. I mean, this is a child, 15-year-old boy learning to drive on a highway that I frequent a lot in Los Angeles. I hope that he's paying more attention than what it sounds like. How can I teach kids to drive in a way that would be more fun and exciting and create better drivers on the road? So really, everyone has kind of come from a personal experience. But as you point out, none of them had any similarities in terms of the verticals or the industries that they were born out of.
Right. And what I was kind of getting at was like everyone has ideas, right? Ideas are just floating around, and probably someone that, an idea that you have for a business, someone else has had before, and really comes down to execution and actually making it happen. Right. And so for you, like
Yes.
you have this, you get inspired by this pain point, or you see something going on where like I can build a solution for that. What do you do next? Like, what's your next step? Because you don't know anything about it. Are you doing a bunch of like research and trying to figure out, is the business viable and this and that? Or are you just taking a little bit more of a, I don't know, grassroots, just like, I'm just going to start it and see what happens?
Yeah, for me, it's always been more of not necessarily research, but informal friend, family focus groups. Like, I love sharing my ideas with people. A lot of entrepreneurs, I feel like, get very paranoid when they have a new idea. And so what they start thinking about is like, oh, I don't want to tell anyone because someone's going to steal my idea or this or that. I've been the exact opposite. If I have an idea, I want to tell every person I know about it and get immediate feedback as to whether they think it's a good idea or not. And that's been kind of, so I guess you could say at some level that's research, but I've never done it in a systematic way. I've done it more in an intuitive way. And if I tell people my idea and I'm getting a lot of positive feedback, or I would love to buy a pair of those shoes, or I would love to learn those practices and habits that have transformed your life through Madefor. Like, those are the things that I'm hearing. Now, with Madefor, I think because I'm a little bit further along in my entrepreneurial journey and I have maybe more resources to really fine tune something before launching it, we spent a full year and did a beta test on 1,300 people from all different backgrounds and all 50 states to make sure that the program was really effective in changing people's lives. So that's the only time that I've really kind of taken my time and really done kind of deep testing before launching something.
Blake, this podcast, we've been doing it for almost 3 years. And, one of the coolest things about it is, every founder has a story. And then within those stories, there are sub stories. And I think what's really great is when our listeners are listening to these sub stories, they can connect it to their lives, right? And they can say, oh, we've had something similar to this idea, or we've had something similar. Why not just kind of go for it? And, we've seen a lot of those stories where we've, through this podcast, inspired people. So, I do want to kind of go and break down some of your sub stories, and, starting with, let's say, the advertising company that you started, and, you sold that in 9 months, right? We talk about things not being an overnight success. I would consider that an overnight success, right? What was the idea? How did you make it happen? And why the hell was it so successful so fast?
Yeah. So, I think two things. One is the 9 months is a little misleading because that was 9 months from once we actually got launched. It took me a full year to convince the city council members to let me do it. So the idea was this simple, is that I recognized that in Los Angeles and in New York, there were these major, massive advertising on the sides of buildings. But in most cities in the country, that did not exist. There were just traditional billboards. And I realized that one of the main reasons, especially in Los Angeles, that people spent this much money to put someone on the side of a building was it was very ego driven. It was the heads of the studios wanting their movie or their actor or their actress to be on the side of the building when they drove to work every day. So I had this hypothesis that Nashville, Tennessee, where all country music stars live, would also have very big egos around managers and agents and artists. And if I could get one of the top artists on the side of a building, all the artists would want to have their face on the side of a building. So that was the premise. The hard part is that it was illegal to do so. So I had to convince the city council that I wasn't creating just, mass advertising, like, going to put Bud Light ads up on the sides of buildings, but I was actually creating country music art. So I reframed the conversation and the pitch. And that's what you sometimes have to do if you have someone you're trying to sell to. In a sense, I was selling to city council. And I said, look, we're the country music capital of the world. How cool would it be when you drive downtown, instead of seeing, brick buildings or gray buildings or whatever, you saw the country music stars who've made this town so famous. And they loved that idea. And so there were restrictions. I couldn't put any type of advertisement. It could only be art, but I could put their cover of their new albums. And this is when we still all bought CDs. And so the cover of an album was a really important part of advertising it. And so I tied up the buildings with the owners. I got city council to approve it. And then once I did launch, it was kind of an overnight success, but it was a year worth of work to kind of get to that place so that I could legally do it.
And as we all know, I think Clear Channel was the company that acquired it, right?
Yep.
I hear a lot of entrepreneurs, like when they're starting when they have an idea and they want to start a business, oftentimes one of the reasons why they might not pursue it is because they might think, a larger company can just easily copy us and do this as soon as they get wind of it, and we're just going to be left in the dust and that's it. And this was something that obviously, it was different and it was unique, but I can't imagine like a Clear Channel or one of these bigger companies, why do you think that they came and acquired your company as opposed to competing with you? Like, what was something that was different or special about it that they would rather acquire than just completely come out and copy you and destroy you?
Yeah, it's really simple. 10-year contracts with the landlords. So, I had 10-year contracts with the landlords of the buildings. And yeah, I'm sure they could have tried to strong arm the landlords and tried to, but it was just much easier to buy out the contracts for me. But yeah, in a lot of cases, without those contracts, they definitely would have done that.
Makes sense.
I think there's two good lessons there. Number one, try not to deal with the government. And number two, sign long-term contracts if possible. Right?
Yeah. I want to say something to that because I think this is so important for entrepreneurs listening. When you're starting out and you don't have a lot of confidence or you don't have a lot of leverage, it's easy to want to have your business or your idea succeed so much that you cut corners. It would have been easy. I wanted those ads to be on those buildings so bad that I could have just gone landlord and said, just give me a 1-year deal. But a 1-year deal wouldn't have been a good business. It would have been good for my ego. I would have made a little bit of money. But if I was going to invest all this, I needed to have those contracts. So my point there is, if you believe in something, be willing to, kind of play the long game and do it right so that you can have a good exit versus just trying to get into business and cutting corners.
That's a good lesson. I know that after you sold it, you kind of tried to do something fun. You and your sister applied for Survivor, and then the production team said, you know what, we got this other show called The Amazing Race. You get to win $1 million if you win. What was that experience like? I know you didn't win, but what was that like?
Oh, it's one of the great experiences of my life. I mean, I got to travel around the world for 30 days with my sister in a fierce competition that I loved. We lost $1 million only by 4 minutes after 30 days of racing. So that was a little bit heartbreaking. But I got to see all these cultures. I got to have experiences I never would have had before. That was truly one of the great experiences of my life.
How do people put themselves in those positions, not just to be on The Amazing Race, but to gain those experiences, right? Like you said, you met a lot of different cultures and got to experience a lot of different things. How does one do that? Because from the people that we've talked to and that we know, a lot of their perspectives come from travel and different cultures and different things, and it makes them a better professional, a better person, right? How does one do that, on purpose?
Well, I think that it's all about, setting intentions and goals, and really taking initiative. One of the most important lessons I learned early on in business and life is like, just show up. You show up on someone's doorstep at their office versus sending them a letter or an email or now a text message. Like, it gets people's attention. And some of the most important things in life are about just taking the initiative and showing up, and not waiting for opportunities to come to you.
Okay, so going back to the sub stories, after you sold the outdoor advertising business, and then you did the Amazing Race, what happens next? What do you do?
Well, I mean, I was fascinated. I mean, this was, gosh, I don't know how many years ago this was. I was 25,
I
so
think 2000.
yeah, 18 years ago. So 18 years ago, reality TV was just really taking off. I mean, there were only a few shows. There was Survivor, there was Big Brother, Amazing Race, a couple others. But I was fascinated by having this, what we call 15 minutes of fame, or what Andy Warhol called 15 minutes of fame. And it was longer than 15 minutes. It was really like for weeks afterwards, people were like recognizing us in airports. We were getting invited to go to like Will Smith's kid's birthday party because he loved the show. Like, I mean, there's just these random things. And I was seeing that, we were in the tabloids and like all this, like a real celebrity. And what I recognized is that when a reality show is done airing, the network just wants to immediately move on to the next show, the next cast. But the audience is still in love with these people. And so I had this idea to create a cable channel that would be all reality all the time and really focus on kind of following these stars after their shows, because that would be really inexpensive content to create. You already had a built-in audience. You had fans. And so I partnered with the founder of E! Entertainment Channel. And we worked on launching this reality channel. And we worked on it really hard for a couple of years, raised some money. I put a bunch of money in myself. Ultimately, Rupert Murdoch and Fox launched a competing channel called Fox Reality. And ultimately, they just kind of crushed us. And so that was probably one of the biggest public failures and financial failures of my entrepreneurial life. But I learned some great lessons through it.
And how did you tell us like how you ended up connecting with Larry Namer, who started E! Entertainment, and how you guys partnered up? Like, was it something that you just contacted him and pitched him, or did he already know about you and you sort of just discussed it with them? How did that happen?
No, I just cold called him. I researched online who were the founders of these channels. I recognized that E! was a very similar format to what I was thinking of doing. He, was retired from the cable channel business at that time, but still had a consulting business. So I just, just cold called him, set up an appointment, and he luckily agreed to meet with me for a few minutes. And I pitched him my idea, and he liked it.
Why do you think you weren't able to continue it even when Fox launched? Because I mean, Pat asked you about the whole Clear Channel thing earlier and about competition from these bigger companies. Why wasn't it something that you could have just done and still competed?
Yeah. So this is a great lesson, and it's one of the great business lessons I learned in my life. And that is, if you're going to launch a business, be very careful launching a business where ultimately a very small number of people or companies can decide your fate. So in the cable business, your fate, whether you can launch or not, has nothing to do with the people who will actually watch your shows, has nothing to do with the advertisers that ultimately will generate your revenue. It has everything to do, or at least used to, not as much anymore, with the 10 cable operators in our country that control basically the bandwidth of what goes into people's homes. And so I had a great idea. People wanted the channel. I had advertisers begging to be advertising with us, but I couldn't get it on the networks, especially once Fox said they were going to do it, because Fox could afford to actually pay the networks for space the same way you might pay a grocery store for space in their shelves. So what I learned in that is I would never launch a business again that had only a few key decision makers that could decide my fate. And I think that's one of the reasons why you've seen all these amazing D2C e-commerce companies and fashion and everything else pop up, is now the customer gets to decide your success, not the department store.
Right.
Right. And it's one of those things where I imagine, like, obviously with telecommunications and I don't know, water and power, like maybe some of these like more traditional industries that have these, like you said, these big market leaders that are sort of, it's like a sort of not a monopoly, but it's monopolistic, where it doesn't allow income, new incoming, startups to come in and like play, and I imagine there will be some sort of disruption, but it's a great lesson because I think it does make it a lot more difficult to start a business unless you're working on disrupting it and taking people away from exactly what they're doing. It's really difficult.
Totally.
Yeah.
So you kind of run into this position now where you have this failed business. Are you at all unmotivated, or do you, I don't know, do you feel like, damn, like after all this time, like, nothing was able to come of it, or were you just kind of motivated to go on and do the next thing?
No, I had a series of weeks, if not months, where I was pretty unmotivated, pretty frustrated, sad. I had to let go 40 employees, lost a lot of money. I was shaken, yeah, for sure. But, as I said earlier, and using the analogy of a romantic relationship, the best way to get over a breakup is to find another person, and so that's what happened. I was kind of wallowing in the failure of that channel, and I was at a barbecue and talking to this 15-year-old boy about his driver's ed experience, and I just had like this light bulb pop off and be like, man, here's an industry that has had no innovation in like decades. I mean, nothing has changed since I did it 20 years ago. And now with technology and online learning and all these other things, like this is exciting. And so I just got excited about it the same way you'd get excited about maybe a new girlfriend and then you forget your heartbreak.
And so you launched what? You launched another company?
Yeah, so this is called Driver's Ed Direct. And basically, it was the first online driver's education company in California. And it had two other very important, I would say, marketing hooks. The first was we were the only driver's ed company to use hybrid vehicles. We used Priuses. That was the first vehicle that came out that was a hybrid. And so we were able to educate people on the advantages of a hybrid vehicle. And that was kind of cool for kids to get to ride in and participate in versus the typical old, outdated cars that they would learn in. And then probably most importantly is I only hired models and actors and actresses for driving teachers. So I hired people who were super hot. And what do teenage kids care about? Hot chicks and guys. And it is right when MySpace took off. So everyone wanted a picture with their hot driver's ed teacher on their MySpace page. And so it was great because these actors and models needed part-time work. I paid them really well. I gave them flexible schedules. And before you know it, every teenager in LA wanted to do our driver's ed because they could do it with an Abercrombie and Fitch model. And it took off.
I'll tell you this. I definitely didn't use your
same. I was about to say, where was this?
Yeah, because and I remember I failed my first test because I had a dude named Basil who taught me how to drive.
Yeah.
He spelled Basil.
Yeah.
Nice guy. But, if it was a hot girl, I probably would have been a little bit motivated to pass, the first time. Or maybe not, to fail a couple times, taking a lesson. So not a bad
It's a good recurring business. It's the
not
same
a bad business model. So you sold that business too?
Yeah, so that was a fun one because I had this kind of crazy idea, but I also knew that like you kind of had to be an insider to get the permits to do that type of business. Obviously, it's kids' lives at stake, so you can't just start a driver's ed business as easy as you can start, a shoe company even. And so I worked with some two amazing men who had been in the driver's ed business for a long time. They'd been doing it in the traditional classroom setting. And I brought the innovative idea, and then they brought their permits, and together we did it. And after about 2 years, I had the idea for TOMS. And then once TOMS started to take off, I realized I couldn't do both. And so I sold them my shares and actually used that capital to help grow TOMS.
Got it.
Yeah, so let's talk about TOMS. I know you went to Argentina. Tell us about that trip. Tell us what you saw and what inspired the idea for TOMS.
Yeah, I mean, I was, down in Argentina, and I saw a lot of kids living in pretty intense poverty situations. One of the things specifically I noticed is many of them were not wearing shoes. And I at the same time, I had kind of seen a lot of the polo players and their girlfriends wearing these shoes that were very unique. They looked more like a slipper to me than a shoe, but they were warm and they were very stylish down there. And like a lot of ideas, two ideas kind of came together. And that was, there's all these kids that can't afford shoes. There's this really cool shoe that I've never seen what if I sold this shoe to people who can afford it and then gave an extra pair to a child that can't? That would be a fun project. This was the first time I ever launched something that I actually did not see it as a business, and it obviously became a very big business. I called it a project. It wasn't a nonprofit, but it really didn't think it would make money. So I just called it the Shoes for Tomorrow project. And it was my idea of using my business skills to build something to help people. And, it wasn't until, about 6 months to a year into the project that I realized that this could be a profitable business and help people. And that's when, it became a business.
Yeah, I remember, and I remember, hearing about Tom's and the whole 1-for-1 model, and sort of the criticism you heard was like, well, how is this going to be a viable business model back then when you're first starting? It's like, how is this going to
Sure.
work where you're producing 2 shoes for one? And so, for you, like, because you weren't approaching it as a business. At what point did you try to figure out the economics of it, and how did you figure that out?
Yeah, it's interesting. The economics figured themselves out. So for the first 6 months to a year, I didn't really see it as a viable business. And so I saw it more as a philanthropic, fun project. But as we started to grow and scale, all of a sudden our cost came way down. So, making shoes in people's garages, which is what we were originally doing, is not very cost efficient. Once you can place orders of 10,000 or 20,000 pairs at a factory, all of a sudden your costs go down 70%. And now you've got a lot of margin and a lot of profitability. So really, I didn't do anything except follow the demand, and the demand created efficiency that ultimately created profitability.
So I'm curious, when you sold the driver's ed company and then started this project, were you already financially secure? Was the goal to not, necessarily make money? Because a lot of times,
It
when people are
was,
starting a
yeah,
business, the goal is to make money, sure, do something good, but
sure.
they're not usually in a position of financial security.
Yeah, no, I was definitely not in a financial secure place, but I also wasn't living paycheck to paycheck. So I had some money in the bank that if for a year I did this project and helped a bunch of kids and had fun, I could do that and then figure out my next thing a year from now. So it was a little bit in between. I mean, it was almost look at Tom's in that time period, almost like an entrepreneurial sabbatical, even though it turned out to be the most demanding entrepreneurial experience. But I was just having fun. I wanted to help people. I wanted to do something different, and I had a little bit of cash flow that would allow me to do so, but not enough that I was by any means financially secure.
And yeah, and going back to, like, you mentioned at scale, obviously the economics make sense, but when you're just getting started with something like this, how did you approach it? Like, did you have to find an investor who had to, put money in to manufacture these shoes and get them out there, or was it completely self-funded? Like, how did you go about those early days?
Yeah, I was totally self-funded. It cost me about $5,000 to make the initial run of shoes, and then I would sell them, and then I would make more because I would get paid right up front, and then I'd make more, and then I'd sell them, and then I'd make more, and yeah, I was totally self-funded. And actually, Tom's was completely self-funded until 2014. I never had an investor until I sold half of it to Bain Capital. So that's one of the reasons why I was able to have such a liquidity event, was that I didn't have to pay any investors back.
Do you think that there was any, or do you think that now there is any sort of correlation between building a business for a purpose rather than for capital, and the correlation to how much money that business makes? Meaning, you started Tom's for a good purpose, to give back,
Yeah.
and it ended up becoming a very financially, a financial success, right? Is there a correlation there? Should more people, focus on that piece of purpose as opposed to a business for capital only?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are very much a case study of how having a purpose and a mission is financially accretive versus a cost. I think number one is you can create incredible evangelists for your brand because they believe in what you're doing, and that reduces your marketing cost. Number two is the loyalty of repeat purchasing, because they are part of something bigger than just buying a thing, also helps with driving sales. Third thing is, I think you can attract and retain employees for lower cost and motivate them at higher levels of productivity because there's a mission. So yeah, I mean, I'm a huge believer in that. From an ethical, moral, spiritual standpoint, it's a great idea to incorporate a purpose in your business, but also just from a pure, profitability standpoint, I think when done authentically, it can have a huge impact.
I mean, you guys really became, you use the word case study, like social entrepreneurship. I mean, you hear about this all the time now. Every company almost
Yeah.
now that launches, focuses on social entrepreneurship. Why do you think we didn't see a lot of that before Tom's? Why wasn't that? Why is that something that's only happened in the last decade and a half?
I mean, it's kind of like, I don't know, the sharing economy. I mean, all these major shifts in the way that people think happen usually because of one idea that catches fire, and it wasn't like we needed any special technology or special insight to do what we did. We just challenged something that for hundreds of years had not been challenged, and that is business can do good and be philanthropic and make money. And so I think it was just a matter of changing people's mentality. I also think that culturally something was happening around 2007. There was a financial crisis. A lot of people lost their savings. They lost trust in corporate America. They were angry. So we tapped into that, kind of radical spirit of here's a business that's not just about making more money, but helping people. And that tapped into people's love for the brand. But yeah, I mean, if I look back on it, and I do with total humility, it's just, it almost feels like I was used as a vessel to bring this idea to culture versus I had the idea myself. Like, it's too big of an idea. It's affected, the history of business in such a bigger way than just me and Tom's. But yeah, I think it was just like many ideas that have changed industries and business. It's just, it's time had come.
Do you think in your opinion, like business could be a solution for a lot of the environmental or societal or human issues that we're dealing with today? Like, take for example, like homelessness,
Yes.
right? It's a big issue, especially here in California. Um, do you think that business can solve all these problems, or do you think it's going to be business working with government or vice versa? I don't know. Like knowing what you know.
1,000%, I think business has a role to play in all the social injustices in the world, because most of the social injustices in the world are a derivative of economic disparity and greed and corruption. And so I don't think business is the only factor. I think business, along with good government, along with good philanthropy, but I think business always has a seat at the table.
Tell us a little bit about, when you were getting started with Tom's, what were some of the early maybe challenges or something that you didn't expect to happen that you guys had to deal with to get it really to the point where everyone knew about it and everyone, sort of came across someone that perhaps had a pair or bought one themselves. Like, that we always hear about those success stories, but tell us a little bit about those early challenges that you had.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing with Tom's, and I think it's very unique, is that none of the challenges were marketing, sales, awareness oriented. All the challenges were supply chain, because I had no experience making shoes, and most of my early employees had no experience making shoes. So it was just one supply chain problem after another for 8 years.
Mm.
I'm curious, as a leader, how are you as a leader, right? You talked early on in the episode about, being an individual sport player, right? You play tennis for most of
Yeah,
your life, and you really have to depend on yourself for that. There's no one
yeah,
that's going to help you hit that backhand or get that lob or whatever, right? Like,
sure.
it's just you. But
Yeah,
how did that translate into becoming a leader of people, of working in a team? Because look, at the end of the day,
yeah.
sure, you're a visionary. You have all these great ideas, but you can't do it alone. Maybe you can get to
No,
one
of course.
point of the story by yourself, but then you got to get a team to really push you forward. Talk to us about how that was like for you and how that is like for you now.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's such a relevant topic because with Madefor, it's the first time I have a partner. My partner, Pat Dossett, was a Navy SEAL for 9 years. I have partners who are scientists at Stanford and Harvard. And, like, I am just one part of the team of Madefor. And it's really fun, frankly, to have teammates. In the SEALs, they always talk about teammates. And so Pat uses the word teammate a lot. And I feel like I'm part of a team. Now, there's certain things that I only can do for Madefor, and there's certain things that only Pat can do, and definitely things that only the neuroscientist at Stanford can do. But being part of a team is really fun. And so I would say before Madefor, as a leader, when I was kind of me and only me as the owner and the driver, my leadership style was one that I co-opted the term from Yvon Chouinard, the founder of Patagonia, and that is MBA. So not MBA like you think of business school, but management by absence. And so what I found was the best way I could be a leader was to get the fuck out of the office. Like whenever I was around too much, I was causing problems. But if I gave them an idea, a plan, a big idea, and then I got out and I was selling and evangelizing and meeting customers and doing that and let everyone in the office really manage themselves, that's what I think allowed TOMS especially to grow so fast and for people to feel so invested in it. And even with Madefor now, as a teammate, I'm not in LA where the company is based. I'm in Wyoming. And so I'm doing what I can do, but we have a great leader and a day-to-day manager in my partner, Pat. So it's just different. I think different times of my life, different businesses. And I think there's advantages to both, to being a sole entrepreneur and then also being a partner and a teammate.
Yeah, and before we get into Madefor, tell us, what led to you leaving TOMS in 2014? Like, what was the situation?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. I mean, I had, been at it for, 8 years. I had no investors. So I was not only the only founder, but I was the only financial investor. So now we were writing major checks. The company was about $500 million in sales. So, imagine managing your personal checkbook that way. And my wife at the time was having our first child. And so I was just kind of burnt out. I needed a break. I wanted to have someone else besides myself to have some of the pressure and responsibility. And I recognized that it was an opportunity for me to have a more balanced life. And so I sold half the company in 2014, hired a great CEO who was an amazing man who I loved working with and loved working for. And then I started investing more time in, hobbies that I'd always wanted to do, being a dad, and investing in other social entrepreneurs. And that was great for a couple of years. And then I really hit a tough patch in 2016, 2017. And largely now that I reflect on it, is I had just put so much of my energy, as so many founders and entrepreneurs listening to this podcast do, into their business, that I had really neglected some of the basic physical and mental hygiene, so to speak. In short, there were certain things that I wasn't doing that other people were doing, and that was causing them to live in a more flourished state and in a higher state of well-being. And so I found myself depressed for the first time. I didn't have energy to get out of bed. I didn't know what my next thing was. I was just kind of like, I had everything that I thought I ever wanted, but everything that I ever wanted was all external. And I hadn't developed the capacity to control the internal aspects of my life that would give me that deep well-being and feeling of fulfillment. And it was frankly kind of scary. It was a scary time because I was only, 40 years old, and I felt like I thought I had the rest of my life ahead of me, but I was constantly just looking in the rearview mirror, and I had, for the first time in my life, lacked the energy and the motivation that I had for the previous 15 years as an entrepreneur. And so it was a scary time.
And Blake, kind of tying into that, I remember at one point you said something, or you've said it a couple times, about how you need to take care of yourself before you take care of others, right? And I'm sure that that's a big portion of why Madefor, even began. But beyond that, I mean, you've really taken care of a lot of people, right? Like, through business, through TOMS. I mean, I know you had received an award for, being involved in global public health, and that's something that you're truly, passionate about. But why was it that you put others before yourself until you hit that point, right? Until that you realized, I need to do something about myself too,
I think, a part of it is And I don't know if this goes back to the early days of tennis and, being competitive and liking to win and liking people to clap when you hit a good shot and liking applause and public recognition and people to say you're a good person. All that kind of caught fire, especially with TOMS, and it was intoxicating. I mean, being on the cover of magazines and having Bill Clinton tell you you're one of the most interesting entrepreneurs he's ever met, or getting awards from Harvard in public health. I mean, all that public acclaim was intoxicating. And I say that without any ego and just being honest of like, I wasn't prepared for that. And that gave me a lot of fuel to keep driving and driving and driving. Not to mention, I was going on, 1 to 2 giving trips a year to places like Ethiopia or Guatemala, or even, the kind of really, poverty-stricken areas in rural Tennessee here in the United States. And seeing these kids being so happy with these shoes and the joy that their parents had and the hugs and the love we received when we gave the shoes, it was also equally as intoxicating. So I think all that positive stimulation and feedback allowed me to run really hard without taking care of myself for a long time. And then that's why when all that kind of stopped, when I kind of sold half of TOMS and started living a more private life, I think that's part of what allowed me and made me kind of look internally and kind of see like, wow, like I was depending on the rat race of all this stuff to keep me going. And now that the music has stopped and I'm still and I'm calm and I'm a dad and I'm kind of experiencing a more normal life, if you will, I realized like I didn't have that stimulation to keep me going. So I had to find it some other way. And that's really when I started looking to not just like reading a book here or a podcast here, but like what had science proven really contributes to one's well-being. I mean, I'm sure you guys have heard, and a lot of people listening have heard about the blue zones in the planet. And the blue zones, if you haven't heard of it, is where the most centurions live, where people who live to be 100 and greater are most likely to live. And there's one in Japan, there's one in Costa Rica. And so I think that book was, kind of the beginning of showing that there are some very specific things you can do to live longer. And it very similar, what I found, is there's some very specific things you can do to live happier. And I wasn't doing a lot of those things. And so I went to science and to laboratories and specifically neuroscientists to learn what could I do differently to live in a higher state of well-being.
I love that. Yeah. And it's one of those things where, it's this sort of existential crisis that people talk about, where you kind of reach a point in your life where you're like, what do I exist for? What am I, what's my purpose? Like, what will make me happy or live longer and that kind of stuff. And a lot of people sort of dwell on it, or maybe they rely on medications or things like that to get better. But you kind of turn back to, again, business and like, how can I create a solution that could help me solve my problems, but most likely other people have the same problems that I do. So it could be hopefully something bigger. So tell us a little bit about, what sort of went into creating Madefor. Like, what did you see? What did you find out? And how did you come up with the solution?
Yeah, I mean, I think just starting with the name, like, is exactly what you said. Like, I think at some point in our lives, we all ask ourselves, what am I made for? And that's where the name was born out of, was me asking that question and Pat asking that question ourselves. And, and kind of on that path of answering the question, what am I made for? You also dive into what am I made of? What are the things that contribute to my well-being on a daily basis? And the most exciting and challenging thing that I found is that it actually wasn't any major interventions or biohacks or any crazy new program I needed to do. It was very basic things like developing an optimal, way to sleep at night. It was, staying hydrated in a better way and understanding how hydration affects your mood and your energy levels, especially in the afternoon. It was understanding like how you're surrounding the physical clutter in your office or in your home, how that can create stress in your life. I mean, all these very simple things that scientifically have been proven is what I started experimenting with. So I spent a year basically experimenting with these very basic practices and habits that had been proven to have positive effect on people's lives, and kind of combining them and stacking them in different ways to see what would give me the most optimal benefit. And the great thing is I went from a state of being kind of depressed and having less energy and less, hopeful for the future and digitally distracted all the time and probably not even the best dad, to within, 6 or 8 months of integrating these very simple things in my life, feeling better than I've ever felt before. And that's when I knew that we needed to start a business. I mean, just like some other things we've talked about, I didn't really set out to create a business. I set out to feel better myself. And when these practices were having such a positive impact on myself, then I realized, gosh, we have a huge opportunity to help people in this country, live better and feel better. And they don't have to do anything crazy. I mean, these are basic things we can teach them. And that's how we developed the Madefor program, was to really teach these basic practices, one practice a month for 10 months, so that other people could experience a state of well-being that I experienced for the first time in my life after I started doing them.
One of the things that, we see in these blue zones, and the book Geeky Guy does a good job of sort of diving into this, is this concept of flow. And, these folks who tend to live longer and live healthier lives, they're working on things that bring them fulfillment. And it might be something super small, something very like a small part of a bigger process, like whatever it might be. But, and I think that that's definitely something that a lot of people, especially here in the US, lack, which is working on something, spending their time on something that they truly are fulfilled by. And it's not just, about making money or this or that. It's something much bigger than that. And this whole flow concept is, that feeling that you have when you're working on something, you just forget time exists, right? And so is that something that's also built into Madefor, which is helping people find something that they are fulfilled by and a purpose?
Exactly. But we build up to that. That's towards the end of the program. And the reason we build up to that is another really important concept in flow. If you study it from a scientific period, is also this word that's so important called momentum. Momentum is what ultimately creates flow. And so this has been especially important during COVID-19 is our members have some very basic things that they ground every day in that gives them momentum. So no matter what uncertainty, challenges, crises that are thrown at them, message from the media, they're more grounded and they have some positive momentum going into their day, into their week. And that gives them a better opportunity to get into that flow state, which often comes from working on something that gives you fulfillment. So yes, one of the major things that we help people with towards the end of the program is answering that question, what am I made for? Really establishing your core values, understanding your true north and what can get you into a flow state in work or your personal life. But before that, we work on some very basic things so that you can have momentum in your daily life as well.
So Blake, you mentioned it's a 10-month program. Each month you get something new. Could you give us an example of what somebody would get, on month 1 and month 2, just for our listeners who,
Sure.
are just curious about the company and how it works?
Yeah. So, basically every month you get a box in the mail that is a Madefor kit. And one of the things that's really unique about Madefor is it's completely analog. There's no digital app. There's no device. I mean, there's nothing that you need that is digital at all to do the program that's not in that kit. And in that kit, there are 3 things. There is 1, all the consolidated science from one of our universities that we've worked with or one of the scientists consolidate into a 20-minute read. We really looked at what's the least amount of time that we can ask someone to sit down and focus and read something to really understand the science in a way that they can apply to their life. The second thing is a physical tool that we have designed to help you not only learn, but sustain this new habit. And then the third thing is the monthly challenge. And that is something that you will work on for 21 days during the month. And it has a little bracelet to remind you of your commitment to the challenge and ways to stay accountable. So using that framework, which is every month, I'll give you an example of a month. So one of the months, which is very basic, but absolutely fundamental, is the hydration month. We did a lot of research around the effect if someone even gets dehydrated by 1% to 2%. I mean, most people would never even know what a 1% or 2% change in hydration feels like until they get really tuned into their hydration. But it can affect your sleep. It can affect your mood. It definitely affects your energy level. I mean, I used to take double espresso shots in the afternoon to keep powering through. Now I got my Madefor bottle and I chug 2 or 3 of them and have the same effect. So hydration month, what happens is you get all the science around hydration. We debunk a lot of the myths around hydration as well. And then you get this bottle that has a way to keep track of how many bottles you drink during the day. It has these very specific beads, almost like prayer beads, that you slide over every time you finish a bottle. The neuroscience shows you that you get a dopamine hit every time you move one of those beads. And at the end of the day, when you've moved all the beads over, you really get a nice reward and you get to experience how you feel being properly hydrated. And so there's a challenge about how much you'll drink with that tool that's there. So the framework is always, teach people in the basic, most simplest way to learn something, give them a tool that they can interact with, and then give them a reward at the end of every day and every month. And that's how you form new neural pathways that allow you to sustain a new habit.
I'm curious, I know you talk about, shifting your behavior. Are there specific behaviors that we're trying to shift here with this program, or is it just a bunch of different behaviors that you're trying to shift?
There's one macro concept, and it was coined by a woman who wrote a great book about it named Carol Dweck, and it's what we call the growth mindset. So the macro concept of what we're doing by giving you 10 different experiences, because some of them aren't things you do every day. Like 1 month might be an experience that we help curate for you that creates a real transformation. But these 10 experiences together create the ability for your brain and your mind to really go from being in a fixed mindset of like, oh, I'm 43, this is what I do, this is how I am, to I'm 75 and I can learn to dance, or I can start a new company, or I can, get out of a bad relationship and start a new one. So it's really about changing that mindset, which is what I think you guys would agree holds so many people back. And so we do that through these 10 different interventions.
Yeah, it's a feeling that I'm sure crosses a lot of people's minds is once you get a little bit older, even now these days, I'm 28 and I think about it all the time too, is like, damn, like, I wish I did that, or I wish I did this. But it's like, even if you're getting into your 40s, 50s, 60s, even, like, nothing's ever too late. You still have a lot of life to live. So why would you continue to dwell on what you've done in the past, as opposed to, like you said, that growth mindset of being able to do new things and find new ways to be fulfilled?
Is there any sort of community aspect to this, like the Madefor community? And sorry, you could also touch on Pat's point.
And actually your question touches on what I wanted to say too. So I answer your question. So the only digital experience with Madefor is the community. You don't have to be part of the community, but I think 86% of our members are part of it. And so what we do is every month we launch a new class. So let's say you sign up, today we're in July, you would be in the August class. And so there's typically about 500 people in each class. We try to keep them to a manageable number. And then we create a private Facebook group just for that class. And so me and Pat and the scientist will get on the Facebook group and answer questions. People share their experiences, etc., in that group. And that's what helps with the community aspect and staying accountable. The other thing we found is that the effectiveness, or the success of people's transformations also is somewhat connected to, do they do it with someone that they know? So do they do it with a best friend? Do they do it with coworkers? Do they do it with a spouse? Like that has been found. That makes it more fun, I think, because you're not doing it in isolation. So that's important. And then to the community question you asked goes back to, this mindset shift and what people do with Madefor. And what I've been, probably the most exciting thing that I've experienced is people doing things with their lives that have nothing to do with our program or the 10 things that they've always wanted to do, but they never did until they did Madefor and their mind started changing. Whether that is losing 30 pounds, which weight loss is not part of the program at all, but we've had a lot of people lose that weight that they've never been able to lose, or learning to dance, or changing careers, or, these things are happening which have nothing to do with our program, but it's the result of the mind shift change that we're working so hard to create for people.
Right, because I can imagine there isn't like a one size fits all. It's sort of like you want to arm people with the tools necessary to go and figure out what that is for them. And everyone's different, and everyone has different things that they would enjoy and would bring out the best in them, right? And so I love that. But I'm curious, made for aside and just like all your businesses aside, do you have this like overarching goal like for your life, like something that you want to really like at the end of your life, like if I look back and I did this, I can die happy?
I would say for me, the overarching goal more than ever is to be present in every moment. That can sound like a cliche, but what I've found is like we've said, the past doesn't exist anymore. The future is only in our mind. All I can be is fully present in this moment, whether that's talking with you guys or as soon as I get done, going and jumping on the trampoline with my kids. I mean, that is where the beauty of life is. And so everything that I'm doing now is to help me be more grounded in the present moment.
I'm curious real quick about Madefor as well. With a lot of businesses, they're always talking about the target audience. Who are you tailoring this company for or this product or service for? But, as you were talking and as I kind of think about it, Madefor is really for everybody. I mean, you also mentioned that. Has that made it difficult or more exciting to run the business, like the business end of it, to find customers?
Um, I think what's interesting about Madefor, in some ways, it's kind of like Tom's, is I feel like customers are kind of finding us based on friends' experiences or maybe hearing about it on a podcast. It really is something that we're finding that is happening because people have reached a stage in their life where they want to create a positive change. They want to do something. They know someone that did the program and they saw a positive benefit in their life. And so they want to sign up. So really, I believe in a lot of entrepreneurial ventures, you're better off to kind of grow organically and slower at first. So you build that real base of evangelists, and then they do so much of the heavy lifting for you.
And I know that, we are lucky enough to have a code to offer our listeners. I know they gave it to us right before the podcast.
Yep, we'll include it in the description.
Yeah.
below.
So it's Founder Hour. So
Right.
it's 20% off of the entire checkout process or checkout of of the product. So we'll also say it in the beginning of the episode as well. But hopefully people that got to this point will also hear it now and can check out. And it's at getmadefor.com. And I'm excited to learn more about it as well and kind of talk to our friends as well about it and see what they think. Every time we do an episode, we always have a conversation with our friends about the product and the service, and they always give their feedback, which is really cool as well. So we love what you've built, and you're such a great example for folks who have these crazy wild ideas, but they actually just did it. And I really hope that people that are listening take out something out of this, that just try it, succeed, fail. It doesn't really matter. You're 43 years old and you've built 5+ companies, and I'm sure there'll be more to come. It's a journey. There's going to be some lows. There's going to be some highs. I know we've talked to so many entrepreneurs. There's a lot more lows than there are highs. And I think that's what a lot of anxiety and depression is caused by, is a lot of uncertainty. But I think you need to embrace that uncertainty and just, like you said, grow. Just keep growing with everything you do. And, having that mindset, I think, is really, really effective even just as an individual, even if you're not an entrepreneur. So thank you for your story. And, hopefully we can stay in touch and see where this company goes. And, I guess we got to visit Wyoming one day, because a lot of people
come to Wyoming and go golfing.
There you go.
Well, I love to play golf, and it's beautiful here in the summer. So this has been really fun, guys. It's really rare that I kind of get to go through memory lane of all the businesses, and everyone typically just wants to talk about TOMS and Madefor. So I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of go way back and kind of unpack it. It just makes me have a deep feeling of gratitude to you guys and to this life that I've been given. So it's been a beautiful time with you all, and let's stay in touch.
You got it, Blake. Thank you.